Hey everybody, welcome back to Straight Up RC. In this video, we are going to talk about RC connectors. And there's a lot of them. Now, there's a lot of RC connectors out there, and I'm personally no expert. I'm mostly speaking from my personal experience and the amount of RC connectors and plugs that I've dealt with in the past, and what I believe is the most current and most used RC connectors within the hobby. Now, there's a lot of other videos out there about RC connectors. What's the right one to use? What's the best one to use for certain applications? I'm not really here to tell you which ones to use. I'm just here to enlighten some people on what kind of connectors they can experience, especially if you're new to the hobby, because most people that are experienced in the hobby, they already kind of know this information. So I'm just giving you some updated 411 information on current RC connectors within the hobby. Probably the most used plug that you're going to see in RC cars and has been around for as long as I know is going to be the Futaba Servo plug. And this is just a standard 3-pin plug. They're almost always going to have a configuration of power, ground, and the signal wire. Almost every RC hobby grade or even professional grade servo, race grade servo, is going to have a wire connector just like this. Every single RC car I have that has a servo in it, this is the plug that's used every single time. We're probably always going to see these until they come up with a better way to distribute power and signal to a device such as a winch or a servo or an ESC. ESC plugs are the same exact thing. We're always going to see these within the RC industry because there's really no other substitute, and I don't see them ever coming up with a different way to distribute power and signal to individual items within an RC build. You see the same pin structure and same plug structure on things like LED lights, on and off switch, same concept. It just turns the power on and off, and this wire, you see these on a lot of the 2-stroke and nitro models where they just need to turn on and off the RC car. This Futaba pin plug setup it's just a staple. It's been in the RC industry forever. Another plug that has been around for a very long time and will probably never go away is the Tamiya plug. It's a standard power plug that's been around in not only RC cars, but you can find these in Power Wheels, kids' toys, and electrical devices such as the drill starts for some of the nitro RC cars. This plug in itself has been around for a very long time. I personally don't even know the origin of the Tamiya plug, where the name came from, or how long it's been around in the RC industry, but it's been around as long as I know. And it's very specific, very standard, can't miss it. It's basically got a kind of like a box end with the circle and then like a D-shaped slot on the other side. The female end of the box is the exact same thing. It's got like the box end where the box end would go into, and then the D shape right here is basically where the pieces go to, and it's kind of set up that way so you can't really mess it up. You have to plug it in a certain way because you can't go the other way. It's like the kid's toy with the star and the square. You can't plug it in wrong. So that's why it was a go-to, because it worked in so many different applications, and you're gonna see Tamiya plugs all over the place. They're gonna be in so many different things, and obviously a slew of connectors there. So the Tamiya plug is one of the staples as far as one of the plug connectors that you're gonna see all the time in the RC industry. Now, there's a couple other plugs that are out there that are used, but not used as widely. It's kind of well known is the 4mm bullet plug. This is also sometimes referred to as a Redcat plug, because Redcat used this on their RC cars for a lot of years, and this was pretty much the only plug that they had other than Tamiya. And they also had the mini Tamiya, which is the Tamiya, but it's the smaller squares. So they had these plugs for a long time, but they recently decided to change a lot of these, especially in a lot of their LiPo cars. They changed from these plugs to the other plug, which we're going to talk about in a second, which is the Dean's plug. And then there's some other off-size plugs. These in particular are XT150s. You can see like the little XT150 here on the sign right here. And it's just the sizing and the plugging in itself. These are massive plugs. I honestly don't use these very often. I just happen to have them because they were on a device that I had them on. but I wanted to change them, so I cut them off and swapped them out for something else. But these plugs are pretty rare. You don't see these often in lower end RC cars because these can handle a lot of power. So you see these on bigger cars, bigger helicopters, bigger fifth scales, electrical fifth scales, things of that nature. You won't see these often in a lot of hobby grade. This is going to be more performance grade. That leads us to the majority of the major plugs that are out there currently. One of them in particular that I want to mention, it's relatively new, but it's the Spektrum ID Plug. And it's a really cool plug because it allows the Spektrum systems, charging system or ESC system, to understand more of what the battery is doing, and it helps it communicate with the battery because, let's be frank, you can't really know what's going on with the battery unless you have like a device, like a charger, that'll tell you what the condition of the battery is in, whether it's how balanced it is, what the cell voltages are, things of that nature. There's also a lot of other stuff that the whole ID system does for both Spektrum and the Traxxas ID system, but it's really cool that they implemented something that can be used that is so smart, in other words, and that's what it is. It's a smart system. Their plugs are similar to these plugs, which are the EC5 and EC3 plugs. This one is the EC5, and it's a little bit smaller. Again, you can see the name of it, the EC5 here. The EC3 is the same thing. It's a little bit smaller. It's practically the same thing as the Spektrum ID plug. They just colored them a little bit different, and they added a little bit of like wiring feature that allows for more communication with the electronics. I think they're great. They're just only for Spektrum, and the EC5 and EC3 plugs you don't see very often because it's kind of an odd plug, but they're still out there, so they're still within the top 5. And as far as the next plug goes, in my opinion, as far as like I would say the number 3 plug on the market is these XT60s. I first encountered these XT60s when it came to drones. They were on the Redcat Carbon 210 race drone, and that's the first time I really dealt with XT60 specifically, but the plugins themselves are great. These ones are a little bit smaller. They're usually probably ran from like 2S to 6S, but these XT60 plugs are great. They have a really specific way to plug into the battery and the ESC connector. It's very specific, very tight, nice, snug fitting. You can't really go wrong with these. They're really great. A lot of people like these over a lot of the other plug systems. And the other sizing of the XT60s are these XT90s, which are massive. And these are for some serious power distribution. In fact, this is an 8S ESC up to 8S ESC, and these XT90s came on this. Now, this is the only ESC I personally have that has XT90s. I do not actually have any batteries that run these connectors, but I don't need this ESC at the moment, so I wouldn't need to change these over to anything. And quite frankly, they're such good connectors that I personally really wouldn't want to remove these connectors. I would want to get an XT90 to like an EC5 or even an XT60. That way I can run a different set of batteries, and I wouldn't have to cut these off and redo them, because they're just so well done and mounted so well that I wouldn't really want to mess with them. And no one really likes changing over, you know, battery cables anyways. Now, one of the connectors that I want to bring up before I talk about the top 2 connectors, in my opinion, are JST connectors. And a lot of people get these not necessarily confused, but kind of confused with Futaba, because these are practically the same thing. They're just 2-pin connectors, 2-pin little JST connectors. This actually says JST on the plug right here, JST. They're just 2-pin power connectors. You're gonna see these a lot in LEDs, in just something that needs power within an RC car. You see them a lot on these little motors for like Mini Zs or X mods or similar builds and whatnot. But these plugs are very, very useful. They come on a lot of batteries that just need to supply power to something, and they're really useful. They plug in a specific way. I have a lot of LED strings that have this exact same plug on it, just because it's really easy to use this kind of power connector. And again, this is the JST power connector, and they're all over in the RC industry. They're just not used heavily on the higher end, or I should say brand end batteries, because they're so small, you really can't run a lot of power through them. So you see these in smaller applications, but they are heavily used within the RC industry. Now, the next two plugs are probably the two most used plugs in the RC industry currently, and in no particular order do I know which one is used more or not. I just know that if you Google RC battery connector or RC connectors, one of the first two things you're going to see is a Dean's plug, which we're going to talk about in a second, or you're going to see Traxxas plugs. And the reason that Traxxas plugs are so prolific is because they're proprietary to Traxxas. They only come on Traxxas products, and in fact this battery is the very first Traxxas 7-cell battery that I ever acquired from 2013. This is the very first battery that I've ever had. This is almost a 10-year-old battery, same connector. The battery don't work no more, it's pretty much dead, but that's how long Traxxas has had their plugs. And they have their ID system as well, which is a more advanced version of the Traxxas plug. But if you say a Traxxas plug, anybody knows what a Traxxas plug is that's anybody that's involved in the RC hobby. And the plugs aren't bad, it's just they're specific to Traxxas. So if you have a Traxxas system and you need to use a buddy's battery, you better hope that you have a Traxxas connector that has a connector end for your XT60 or an EC5 battery to a Traxxas car, because like I said, they're proprietary to Traxxas. They're pretty much all over simply because Traxxas is everywhere. They're in all the hobby stores, you know, it's the biggest name brand in the market. Can't really go anywhere without seeing a Traxxas model, and it's smart. You know, Traxxas was smart by making their own proprietary plugs. That way it almost forces people to have to get Traxxas products. You know what I'm saying? So it's a smart move. It's just something that has to be understood and known when you're getting into modifying Traxxas RC cars. You just have to know that their ESCs and their batteries are only going to have Traxxas plugs. You're going to have to change it out, or you're going to have to get a connector. And they make connectors for the Traxxas products. You know, you can get wire connectors that allow you to put these onto the batteries and or the ESC. If you have a Traxxas battery and you have like a Hobby Wing ESC, you can put this onto there. You can buy these all over the place, Amazon, eBay, whatever, A-Main Hobbies. You can probably buy them anywhere. And that leads me to the #1 plug, in my opinion, the Dean's plug. And I only say that simply because if you Google battery connector for RC car, Dean's is pretty much the first one that pops up. I don't necessarily know the history of the Dean's plug or where it came from or how long it's been around. I just know it's been around for a long time. I know Redcat switched over to them simply because their LiPo products had the banana connectors, the 4mm bullets, and when getting involved with the brushless to the brushed models, the problem was you didn't know the difference between a LiPo battery and a nickel metal battery, because the connectors were the same. And to avoid people plugging in LiPo batteries to nickel metal chargers, they had to put out warnings on their products to tell people this is a nickel metal charger, don't plug it into a LiPo battery. Unfortunately, some people did, is they plugged their LiPo battery into a nickel metal charger, and bad things happen, because that's not how it works. You're not supposed to do that. In order to change that, all the brushless version ESCs and all the LiPo products that were being distributed going forward from Redcat were all switched to the Dean's plug. And the Dean's plug in itself is also referred to as the T-plug, simply because this connector here, when you look at it a specific way, looks like a T-plug. So that's why it's referred to as a T-plug as well. Now, I don't know if Dean's is the name of the person that came up with it. I think it is. I could be wrong. I should know this information, and I'll probably Google it and find out. But I believe that's named after the inventor of the plug-in itself is Dean's. Again, could be wrong. These are all over the place, and it's smart because you can see legendary RC cars on Amazon with these on them. Even toy grade RC cars are running these. Switching over to something like this for any manufacturer is smart because it just allows their customer to have more wide use of the product. That's why, in my opinion, the Dean's plug in itself, the Dean's T-Plug, is the most widely used plug currently in the hobby grade RC industry, and they're great little plugs. You know, you can't really plug them in incorrectly. The one thing that you will notice on these plugs and any plugs like this, one has pin ends, one has plug ends, male, female. And the one thing that you should take note of is that you should never find a battery of any kind with any one of these plugs. And this is a slight warning with connectors on it that can be contacted, because that power source, that battery, 4S, 6S battery with a power connector that can arc, is going to be bad juju. So this bad boy touches something metal or touches part of your car or sparks, that 6S or 4S volume of power is going to come right out of these connectors. So if you're ever changing connectors, don't ever put the pin connectors on the battery. The battery is almost always, should always have the female end of a connector. It should never have the male end of the connectors. It's bad juju. I'm just letting you know right now. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's because of good warning. Don't ever switch out your battery connectors and put the wrong one on. Or don't ever take, like, let's say you take a banana plugged battery and you put a banana plug connector on the banana plug battery and you accidentally put this connector on the wrong side. It's not going to work. You'll notice this Hexfly 3S battery here, it has the proper connector. You always have to have this end on the ESC and this end's going to be on the battery. Now, like I said, there's a lot of connectors out there. There's some really old style Futaba transmitter and JR transmitter connectors. They're just like the plug-in style. There's connectors that you rarely see, like Saban and the Servo's connector, which is also referred to as the Anderson Power Pole connector. There's the MCX connectors. There is the Mini Ultra Dean's connector, which I don't think I've ever seen in person. It's just like a little connector. But there's a lot of odd end connectors out there that are going to be involved in the electrical power distribution or connectivity distribution between devices that may be involved in the RC world a little bit, but they're probably going to be more specific to other DIY electrical applications. So for the most part, the connectors within the hobby of RCing have been pretty similar. Probably started out pretty minimal because, well, manufacturers couldn't really come up with connectors that were streamlined and really high performance because, I mean, even LiPo batteries didn't exist at a certain time, so they didn't need high amp flow, high power flow connectors until pretty much recently. So you didn't see a lot of the larger style and more performance enhancing style connectors like you do today. A lot of the connectors that were used early on but are still beneficial are things like the Molex and SM connectors like this. There's a couple of different variations of this. You got the MCPX models, and I know these are a bunch of names of connectors that a lot of people never have even seen or didn't know the name of. I didn't. You got a lot of connectors out there that are going to look really weird, but they do have a name to them, and they've been used within the hobby for a long time and are probably still used in some lower end like toy style RRCs or entry level RC cars. I know that the SM style plugs, these little black boxes, Redcat used these on some of the Tremor models. They've also used some of the Molex style ones, which are just like the white connectors. These are seen on some of the batteries that you can get. You can get some of these like on Amazon and everything. They're just a simple connector. You just plug in, just simple as that, just power distribution for something. Probably mass manufactured, easy to get on some of the toy grade RC cars. You can find these on like the Ishin Ripsaws. And then of course you had your like electrical DIY style Molex or, you know, square base, just power connectors that they implemented into the RC industry as well. My kids have a couple of toys that have these specific little batteries, these little 1-cell LiPos that are this size. Some are a little bit smaller, some are a little bit bigger, but almost every single one of them have this little connector on it. And this connector piece right here in itself is very specific. It's like a little white box that has to be plugged in a very specific way. I've noticed that the majority of these have to be charged with just a standard USB plug, a 5-volt standard USB plug that you just plug it into here and plug it into a wall charger for a cell phone or a computer. This one, which I'm not even sure this is the right name, I'm not even gonna lie, but these are apparently called Husband or Husband. Not even sure how to pronounce it. It's like Husban. But I've seen a lot of these in toy grade model RCs, and like I said, my kids have a bunch of these, so these have been circulating a little bit. You buy one of those little toy grade under 10 scale RC cars on Amazon, and you're most likely going to end up with some plugs like this, or some of the ones that I just mentioned a second ago. There's probably dozens that I'm not going to even bother to go over, because either they're minimally used, or they're rare, or you only see them in specific branding or something like that, or in specific applications. But a lot of times manufacturers just use a plug that fits the structure of what they're manufacturing. So if it's a smaller toy, they're going to need a smaller connector. And all those connectors have names, but they're not usually involved in the hobby grade RC side of things. But there you have it. That's my bit of information on the RC plugs currently within the industry. Like I said, there's a lot of them, and it's good to know a little bit of what you're getting into when it comes to this hobby. So understanding the difference of plugs and the fact that you can go out and get connectors of any kind for a battery. If you end up with a car with a Tamiya plug, you're going to be able to find a Tamiya plug to a Traxxas plug. If you end up with a car with the Dean's plug and all your batteries are XT60s, don't sweat it. You can find a Dean's plug to XT60. You can find all that. It's not the end of the world if you end up picking up a secondhand RC car from eBay and the guy didn't tell you that he has Dean's plugs on his car when all you have is Traxxas. There's applications out there that allow you to interchange between the plugs. But in my opinion, in my experience, these have been the most common RC plugs within the industry. If you have more information on any other plugs, or you want to add some information to the plugs that were, briefly covered in this video, feel free to chime in. If I got anything wrong, or if you feel that I need to add information into it, feel free to add a comment down below and clarify. Like I said, I'm no engineer, I'm no expert. I've just had experience with a plethora of these plugs, and obviously I have quite a few connectors myself and plugs in themselves. Some of them I haven't used in months, and some of them I don't think I will ever use again, because I don't know when the next time I'm going to need a male-to-male Tamiya connector is ever going to be. So this is kind of useless. But it's like that box of wires in the garage that your wife complains that you still have, and then one day you need a plug. Well, guess what? Now you have a plug. So they're out there. The plugs are available. Don't freak out. It's not the end of the world. And don't worry if you don't know the name of the plug that you have. The information is out there. Somebody knows it. You can Google it. You can find it. You can figure it out. And then you can carry on and continue RCing. If you have any questions about the plugs covered, or you have any questions about RCs in general, feel free to let me know. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned at least something today, and I will see you guys on the next one.